Hello and welcome to episode 12, Space Tech in New Zealand and Indo-Pacific Strategy. To understand this issue, we have today with us Marçal Sanmartí. Hi, Marçal. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Omkar. Thank you very much for having me.
Likewise, thank you very much for joining us. So, as we'll be taking a deep dive into this topic, so prior to that, can you just provide a brief outlook on your journey in this sector and how you are associated with the space industry as well?
Yes. So basically, my background is in contemporary history. I was doing some research on, like how huge corporations play a role in foreign policies, in the case of Spain. And then I moved to New Zealand and I saw that back then in 2016 and 2016, New Zealand just created its own space agency. I was quite curious about that, especially because New Zealand created its own space agency to allow the activities of a private company called Rocket Lab. And I thought that, if history doesn't repeat itself, it many times rhymes. And, it's and seeing how private businesses drive foreign policies or politic developments much more often than we would like to admit. And then from them, I started to engage with an institution here in New Zealand called the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs. Started writing for their magazine called the New Zealand Review. And most of the times I was publishing on astropolitics or the politics of outer space. And yeah, that was a few years ago. And after that, I've been engaging with other institutes such as the Australian Institute of International Affairs or the Catalonian Global Institute.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I think this is a quite a multidisciplinary background that you have, and as we are in the space industry, everything is not independent, I would say, like physics, mathematics, or chemistry. Things are
Mm-hmm.
highly multidisciplinary. So I think individuals like you are adding value to this industry for sure. So can you also, like, as you mentioned about the astropolitics, your background having such a diverse set of skill set as well. So can you briefly tell us about the history of space in New Zealand?
Mm-hmm. So, as I said before, on paper, history starts in 2016 with the creation of the New Zealand Space Agency to allow the activities of that private corporation called Rocket Lab. In fact, Rocket Lab is an American company, but started its activities from New Zealand. But if we scratch the surface a bit, we could say that New Zealand starts engaging with space back in 2015. There was a meeting in Wellington between senior officials of the Five Eyes. Probably you know that the Five Eyes is an intelligence sharing arrangement between the US,
Yes.
Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And that was related to the war in Afghanistan. New Zealand was participating in that participating, like joining the U.S. in that conflict, and many times found out that they needed support from U.S. satellites to carry their operations, uh, but the knowledge was not still there. So formally, the exact details of that meeting have not been revealed, but it looks like New Zealand was trying to have a better understanding, and then it was invited to the formally invited to the CSPO, which is the Combined Space Operations, which is usually the way the U.S. Engages with its partners when it comes to this sort of military operations and defense operations.
Yeah, I think you mentioned about fire intelligence. Can you a little
Mm-hmm.
bit extend about that? Because I think apart from the space industry, we also have quite a lot of audience from the defense and security as well.
Mm-hmm.
So can you a little bit extend or give a brief about what is fire intelligence and how the cooperation between the nations in this alliance works?
Um, yeah. So basically, the combined space operations, it's a military space initiative consisting of Australia, Canada, France, Germany, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And its purpose is to share information about space operations and activities and coordinate the effort. Um, all of the nations members of the SPO retain all national prerogatives, and there's no formal alliance. So basically, New Zealand joined CSPO in July 2015 as an opportunity to increase its knowledge of the space operations and to strengthen the international relationships, as I said before. In fact, in 2021, the CSPO released something called the CSPO Vision Statement 2031, which stated a collective resolve to enhance responsible behavior, uphold international law, and promote a secure, stable, and sustainable domain. But actually, that's not the only way that New Zealand is engaging with defense partnerships. Also, New Zealand is part of the Shriver War Game, which basically provides participants, and that includes New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, the USA, France, Germany, but also Japan, with opportunities to take policy, legal, and operational approaches to hypothetical space security challenges that might happen 10 years in the future. In the case of New Zealand, because New Zealand is still trying to understand many things related to this field, I would say that the involvement focuses largely on the policy aspects of defense on these sort of matters.
Okay, I think the cooperation part that you mentioned makes sense of how New Zealand is also cooperating on a defense level. But
Mm,
just, little bit coming outside of New Zealand and looking at a broader perspective, we see, even though Australia and New Zealand are neighbors, we see quite a lot of, I mean, accelerated developments in Australia in the space industry.
mm,
But that's not the case with the New Zealand yet. I mean, there
true.
are companies like Rocket Lab, uh,
Mm,
which are not, I mean, Australia doesn't have as much as huge companies or, global companies like Rocket Lab yet fully, but
mm,
I think the amount of funding that they are providing, uh, the way government is encouraging the private commercial enterprises,
mm.
we don't see those news, often like or consistently coming out of New Zealand. So, can you tell us why space tech or space and satellite solution adoption is bit slow in New Zealand as compared to Australia?
That's actually an excellent question, Omkar. Because New Zealand has a huge maritime domain. When we think of New Zealand, usually we don't think that there's something called New Zealand, but also the realm of New Zealand. And the realm of New Zealand includes the free associated states of the Cook Islands and Niue, one dependent territory called Tokelau, and the Antarctic territorial domain of the Ross Dependency. And, they're several thousand kilometers apart. And in fact, the New Zealand search and rescue region is about 30 million square kilometers. That's a huge amount of, it's like space to have a look at. But as you said, those capabilities are not there yet. But we need to have in mind that New Zealand is a 5 million people country, which New Zealand is something like 22. And also, New Zealand, geographically speaking, it's quite safe, but also a high isolated geographical area. Um, but I would say that things might change in the future. Uh, for example, some developments are starting to tell us that New Zealand is going to start engaging more and more in satellite-related activities. For example, in July 2022, New Zealand joined the U.S. declaration to not conduct destructive direct ascent anti-satellite missile test, and also supported a UN resolution led by the United Kingdom on reducing space threats and through norms, rules, and principles of behaviors. Um, since 2012, the New Zealand Defence Force also participated in the wideband global satellite communication system built by Boeing and operated by the United States Department of Defense. Um, in fact, it's quite interesting because, recently, the New Zealand Defence Force released a document called Overview defense interest and engagements in space, and that's an official document released by the Independent Defense Force. And in there, we can read, and I quote directly, that in order to provide dependable security, certainty, and timely use of space systems, future capability development will likely be required to improve national resilience and reduce reliance on others to support New Zealand interest. So I think we can see an answer in there. New Zealand is first trying to build up an understanding of the space domain, but it looks like New Zealand interest in joining these space defense alliances and shared concerns are definitely there.
Okay. So I think this is understandable that, the country is right now expanding and its resources in this domain. And we have
Mm,
also seen there are companies like Pacific Broadband Satellites. It's a well-known company in the Pacific region, I'd say even in the South Asian part as well.
mm,
Uh, they are actually covering a lot of island countries providing satellite communication
mm,
services. They have their own satellites, of course. But yeah, let's see how things work out because I'm hopeful such companies actually receive quite a lot of encouragement from the government and as well as from the the private sector as well because there are not much companies who are operating in this way. So yeah, just a follow-up question on what I said at the moment is what are the I mean from the government perspective, so what are the steps the government agencies are taking to attract more investments in the space
uh,
domain of New Zealand?
Yeah, actually, that's a very good question because, like, one of the unique things of the New Zealand space sector is that it's almost entirely private. In fact, the New Zealand Space Agency is part of the Ministry of Business and Innovation, and in fact, the space agency released a, uh, a Deloitte report, from the consultant firm back in 2019, and basically they were saying that the New Zealand space business sector, well, yeah, it was more than New Zealand, yeah, $1 billion, more New Zealand dollars, more than 1 billion New Zealand dollars, which is, yeah. So it's like the size is there, and I would say that that's quite remarkable for a country that's just 5 million people, and the fact that New Zealand, when it comes to how easy it is to open a business and operate a business in New Zealand, uh, New Zealand is always ranking like very high in all of the international rankings. So I know that like there are more things to be done, but I would say that New Zealand is in a good position for that section for that sector to grow in the future.
That's really good to know because I believe being one of the I mean I know as you mentioned it's an isolated area, but I would
Mm,
say New Zealand is also one of the strategic location
mm,
for the Indo-Pacific relations that are going on at the moment, the kind of issues that are happening. And I think the space applications play a very important role in positioning the nation not only from the power politics perspective, but also from a strategic perspective of creating
mm,
international relations. For example, in Australia, if you see, Australia is now on the way to launch their sovereign military satellite. It's an independent
mm,
military satellite of their own. Uh, but the way they have the relations with the United States, it's the Lockheed Martin who is actually manufacturing the satellite for them,
mm,
the
true.
JP9102 project. So I think those kind of international relations, the cooperations can actually help New Zealand to possibly, build its upstream market as well. I mean, Rocket Lab, of course, is a company which operates in the upstream market, but we can see
Mm,
more and more players coming into the play, specializing in the other domains like Earth observation, navigation, and all. So yes, just I would say we are now shifting a little bit from the space to the Indo-Pacific strategy because
mhm,
that is also a point that we are going to discuss in this episode. So, considering the growth of space applications for defense and security, as I mentioned, So, do you believe in the future New Zealand might use space as a strategic tool to navigate or increase its importance in the Indo-Pacific region?
Well, that's an excellent question, Omkar. To be honest, like New Zealand, um, it's trying to avoid direct confrontation. We've got China as the main economic partner of New Zealand, but also historically speaking, New Zealand way to act in international relations, it's quite non-confrontational. But at the same time, New Zealand is a very solid international partner, meaning like when it commits to something, it commits for real. So I would say that New Zealand is going to be asked by its partners to provide more, if I may say. As you said before, like New Zealand geographical location in the South Pacific provides distinct advantage in Spain domain awareness and communications and satellite control and a satellite information download. And that is why it was quite interesting when we were speaking about the CSPO and we were talking about the members in there. New Zealand is the only member that does not have a space command, right? Um, so I was quite curious to understand like how come the New Zealand has been asked to join, and in exchange of something, I would say. Um, but then, if we check the website of the New Zealand Defence Technology Agency, the DTA, it looks like they have finished building in 2022 a small optical space awareness laboratory to monitor satellites. Um, in fact, even if we go to the website, we can say that the website notes that such capability offers international cooperation opportunities, especially with Canada and the UK. And both of those are members of the Combined Space Operational Center. So yes, I would say that this is one of the steps New Zealand is taking to, it's like to provide to those defense partnerships. But also New Zealand has joined the Shriver War Game, and basically that war game, it's to provide to test policy, legal, and operational approaches to hypothetical space security challenges in the next 10 years in the future. But because New Zealand is still building up its knowledge, I would say that the focus for New Zealand was to test those policy challenges when it comes to the space domain.
I think these are some of the excellent insights that you provided, especially about the combined space operations. Not many people actually aware about this. Of course, the
Mm,
defense and security sector is much aware, but I'm not sure
mm,
if a lot of people in the space industry are aware about this because it's mainly, of course, related to defense. So yeah, thank you very
mm,
much for this pointer. Uh,
mhm,
just actually moving ahead, I would like to understand from your perspective because in the past we had some guests speaking about the Indo-Pacific topic, and they have also explained Quad from their perspective. But I would like to understand, as someone who is based in the New Zealand and who's coming from that region, I would like to know uh, like a brief about Quad because New Zealand is a Quad plus additional member because I think
mm.
the prime members are India, Australia, United States, and Japan.
Yes.
And this organization was actually not much active, but it became highly active f- uh, with the push of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
Mm,
And I think this is an excellent example as you come from the international affairs domain.
mm,
Quad is an excellent example that states, not all states here have similar interest or alignment, but they
mhm.
are still, you know, trying to cooperate on defense and security issue.
Yeah.
For example, I mean, Japan and India have been at a, very good level in terms of cooperation, but India, US, and Australia haven't been, that much, aligned with the kind of cooperation the way other countries have been or their allied nations have been. But due to the Quad, what is happening is now is that we see several. nations, especially like countries like India, for whom actually United States is looking as a powerful navigational tool in the Indo-Pacific region,
Mm,
they are trying to cooperate, even without any similar interests. They're trying to cooperate on defense and security level. So I would like to know from your perspective, like New Zealand is an Quad plus additional member. So can you tell us a bit about what is Quad plus additional member, and what is New Zealand's position in the quadrilateral security dialogue, as they say?
mm. Yeah, it's quite interesting because, like, to be honest, like not many people in New Zealand know that New Zealand is a Quad Plus additional member. Like when we're talking about international partnerships, people are mostly aware of the Five Eyes, but also AUKUS, right? The partnership between the United States, Australia, and the UK.
Yes.
And actually, New Zealand is exploring how to collaborate or might even join some parts of AUKUS, but maybe we can talk about that later on. When it comes to Quad Plus, New Zealand, together with Vietnam and South Korea, partnered with one of the Quad Plus mechanisms established to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Um, but I would say New Zealand, again, is trying to build up the understanding because it is still very cautious about engaging in the wider Indo-Pacific region, right? Um, as we know,
Yes.
like China is the main economic partner of New Zealand. So even though I would say that we can see New Zealand joining more and more with the rest of the Anglosphere or the Western Alliance, if you like to call it, um, it's still quite cautious about avoiding to choose sides. You know, it's like one or the other. Um, so yeah, I would say that before mm, like moving forward or trying to find a bigger collaboration with the Quad Plus Alliance, or even specifically with Japan and or India. I would say that New Zealand would like to understand and like tighten first a possible or a potential alliance inside AUKUS, I would say.
Okay. Yeah, that is an interesting actually insight, I would say, from this perspective, because unfortunately, actually, we didn't speak about China because the only thing, because I tried to stick to the New Zealand's position, because as the topic is related to New Zealand, so I didn't want to divert about it. But yeah, as you
Mhm,
mentioned about China, uh, I would like to just briefly, I mean, because of course our topic is related to the space tech in New Zealand and Indo-Pacific
mhm,
strategy. I would highly like to, stick to the New Zealand. I'm sure you also have the same thought.
mhm.
But just, because you mentioned about China, so what are your thoughts on uh, the relations between New Zealand and China? I mean, is it similar to what Australia is going through at the moment? Because there were quite a lot of fluctuations that we observed
Yeah, oh
between
yeah.
Australia and China. So, what are your thoughts on New Zealand and China relationships?
Yes, that's a very interesting topic. And again, it comes about having in mind what are the capabilities of New Zealand. I think New Zealand is very aware of its own limitations, I would say, um, both because of its size and also the way it's engaging historically international relations. For example, like some years ago, we had an issue that there was some sort of official meeting between China and the Cook Islands, and you could see the flag and the Cook Islands. It's a free associated state inside the realm of New Zealand, so you could see the flag of China and the Cook Islands, but not the flag of New Zealand, and that created a bit of stir and concern inside New Zealand that because it's a free associated state. Maybe at some point the Cook Islands might leave that free association and move closer to China. And I would say that that is why also New Zealand has been engaging more in like military simulations with other members of the South Pacific, including Fiji. Some years ago, it was the United Kingdom, Australia, and Fiji and New Zealand. But again, New Zealand knows that it's quite dependent on China economically speaking at the moment, and doesn't want to be
Yes.
too confrontational. And also, because as we said before, New Zealand capabilities are quite limited, but also I would say it's not in the, how can I say, political tradition of New Zealand to be so directly confrontational. And also there's a bit of distance with the US sometimes. New Zealand is a very nuclear-free zone. Um, you know that there were some nuclear tests in the South Pacific um, during the 1950s and 60s, and like New Zealand even broke some relationships with the United States because of those tests and with the UK. So that is why it's quite cautious when it comes to not aligning too much with some of the partners. Even though I would say that at some point New Zealand is just going to be dragged into engaging more and more with the United States. But again, that is why I think uh, all of these experiences and I would say awareness with the relationship with China is making New Zealand still quite cautious compared to the approaches taken in Australia, which sometimes it's like quite openly confrontational, I would say.
Okay, that this is a quite an interesting insight because I actually didn't know that New Zealand was kind of a little bit drifted away from United States and UK. I think
Mm,
this would be a really good topic down the line to, create a
mm,
follow-up second episode maybe in the future.
mm,
Because there are several angles to explore over here. For
mm,
example, I mean, as you mentioned in the China relationship of, I mean, it's not like other several Western countries, where people or the countries just say yes to the allies just because, it's United States. But I think I didn't
mm,
know about this thing that New Zealand was in a position where it said no, just
mm,
like how India has, so the reason like India has never been into any kind of alliances because in our history we had almost more than 500 years of rules by several empires and all.
mm,
But if even there are several strategies they say the close relationship of India and Russia. But even though if
mm,
you see on a formal level, on a logical level, India doesn't even have alliance with Russia also. It is just
mm,
a cooperation that India has. And I think when you are more independent, uh, you're more, free to take decisions because when you build an alliance, you're always bound to the decisions that might affect your partners as well, or
mm.
the partner nations, I would say. And
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, proceed ahead. I would like to hear your perspective as well.
yeah. Actually, I think the example you just gave with India and Russia, it's an excellent one. It's like um, if you want to be a sovereign nation, you need to keep those communication lines always open and even cooperation lines always open. And that is why we can see that even though that there's a direct confrontation between the European Union and Russia, um, the European Union is still buying gas from Russia. And
Yeah,
you've got sanctions, but they're not complete sanctions. Some sectors are still not under those sanctions because well, if you understand international politics, you know that
yeah,
the winds can change sometimes,
yes,
and you're like someone was your enemy in the past, but maybe in 1 year things can completely change, and we could see that in the Second World War, right? Like Italy
yes,
was fighting with Germany, and then all of a sudden they joined the Allies. Italy did the same during the First World War, and maybe that's a,
yes.
a part of the Italian national character. I'm just
That's
kidding
true.
here,
That's
but
true.
but honestly, that is the nature of international relations, and that is why that probably people are surprised to see that, for example, that in the 1980s, New Zealand signed a New Zealand Nuclear Free Zone Disarmament and Arms Control Act in 1987, and then New Zealand was effectively frozen out of the NZAS alliance led by the United States. But that is just telling us. that New Zealand is a player in the international arena. It's like it has its own strengths, and when they need them, they need to play them. And so yeah, that is why for New Zealand to completely align with the United States, or even with AUKUS, it's quite
Yeah.
a sensitive matter, and that's precisely um, the main reason why New Zealand is still building up knowledge on AUKUS. It's because of nuclear technology. It's like as we know, like AUKUS is famous because it's like basically
Yes.
there's a transfer of technology between the United States and Australia when it comes to nuclear-powered submarines. But New Zealand it's a nuclear-free country, so to have those submarines, nuclear submarines around New Zealand would be a huge issue for New Zealand, and that is why New Zealand is thinking to engage with AUKUS, but maybe with other issues related to artificial intelligence, but not with the submarines, because that's a big no-no for New Zealand.
Okay. And I would like to, just because I think we are approaching the end of the podcast episode. Uh, before I would like to just have a brief outlook from your side, uh, because I think we discussed for a few minutes that thing only. But still, I would like to stress on the point, like looking at the recent movements in the Indo-Pacific region. So, do you believe New Zealand has the potential to scale its presence beyond the Western alliances?
To be honest, I do not think so for now. As we said before, it's good to it's like to be able to navigate through waters, and like never lose contact with any country, because you never know
Yes.
how the things are going to change in the future. But I would say that at the moment, New Zealand does not have the capabilities, nor is the focus of the international presence. Of course, like that
Yes.
might change in the future, and as the Anglosphere is moving more and more into the Indo-Pacific, and I'm just having in mind now the United Kingdom. Like the United Kingdom, in fact,
Yes.
just has a small territory in the South Pacific, but we can see that
Yes.
it's very proactive in its foreign policy when it comes to the Indo-Pacific. But maybe that's not the case of New Zealand for now, I would say.
Okay. Like, thank you for this answer, because I think I was very keen on exploring this because I see Australia on the other side, like as I mentioned, they are trying to build their own satellite, because still now
Mm,
they were highly dependent on the United States for all the satellite resources, space
mm,
resources. But if you see now the landscape of Australia, the way they brought changes in the international relations, foreign policy, and all, they are growing independent now.
mm,
I mean, it's a very recent movement that has started since 2018. But
mm.
there is a way where I think Australia is trying to make a position or take a stand. Okay, of
True.
course, we are great allies with the Western world,
Mm,
but we have our own independent stand as well. So I think
mm.
that's the kind of message they're trying to give. So that's also the reason I was a bit curious about the New Zealand. So yeah, thank you for this answer.
Yeah.
Uh,
Actually, I think Australia is trying to build political leverage inside the alliance. To be honest, you don't like to have more
yeah,
of a say instead
yeah,
of just following the United States every single time.
yeah,
But the space sectors in New Zealand and Australia are quite different, I would say. As I said before, the New Zealand sector is mostly private. So the strategy of the New Zealand Space Agency is to just, like cut red tape, like make things easy for people to develop their businesses in the space related businesses in Australia without pushing things to a strategic direction. It's like South Korea. South Korea, it's for example, or even Taiwan, are building their space capabilities quite focused on certain aspects of the private sector, right? Meaning, like for
yes,
example, like Taiwan knows that it's part of its sovereignty, or self governance, we can say, is based on its semiconductor industry, right?
Yes.
And many of the satellites operating in space are dependent on on those semiconductors and microchips, and that is giving a political leverage to Taiwan. And that is why,
Yes.
like the Taiwan space sector is focusing on that part. Um, I would say that that's not the case of New Zealand. New Zealand, it's trying to attract as many business as possible. And we talked about Rocket Lab, but we've got also other actors like Dawn Aerospace, which is a Dutch New Zealand venture. Um, but it's New Zealand does not have a strategy. It's like, oh, we need to focus on building satellites, or we need to focus on rocket launching. For some reason, well, not for some reason, the geographical location of New Zealand made rocket launching feasible and possible, and that's why it flourished. But before Rocket Lab, New Zealand
Yes.
was not strategically pointing at that, and also why now we can see that, for example, allies are finding New Zealand position quite useful when it comes to satellite ground stations. But again, um, it's like basically New Zealand's strategy when it comes to space businesses is to make things easy for them to come to New Zealand and operate their businesses, not that much to push certain industries to have some sort of political leverage, I would say.
Okay. Thank you for these insights, Marcel. And just, as we are approaching the end now, so as an international affairs expert, what message would you like to give to the future generation stepping into this field of research? Because the reason I have framed this last question is because a lot of students are also, listening to this podcast and the research scholars. And as a research scholar, who has seen like several walks of life,
Yeah.
so I would like to know from your perspective, what message you would like to give them.
Mm. Um, I would I would recommend them to be open minded. Everyone is going to tell them like, oh, this is a very interesting time to be in international affairs. Well, I mean, that's always been the case, right? Every time you go to
Yeah,
university, you go like, oh, this is an excellent time for international relations. Um, but the good thing that we've got right now is that we've got one international language that is truly global, which is English, and you can see like many different agencies, public and private, proactively releasing documents and data. And the
yes,
problem now is there's so much information around that it's difficult to choose, right?
yeah,
For example, in my case, one of the ways I found like very useful to be informed about the war in Ukraine is through Indian media, because India
yeah,
it's neutral, right?
yes,
So
yes.
it's like if you go to well, if you switch on the news on any Western country, you're going to see basically Star Wars. It's like uh,
Yeah,
they are the baddies, and it's like and if you and you cannot even access to Russian media. It has been
true, true.
cancelled. But if you go to Indian media, which you can find them, like for example, like you can find the Hindustan Times, and it's in English, you can see
Yeah.
a different approach. And so, yeah, I would say to international students, like, get out of your comfort zone and don't be afraid of, like consulting media or sources from countries that you might think that they're far away from you, geographically or culturally, but they can provide you some very interesting insight. So, yeah, that would be one of my recommendations.
I think this is one of the excellent pointers I would say that you have given, because I also, I agree with you. People need to look at each and every narrative, not only one narrative, because
Mm,
I see in this multipolar world, people often falling for one narrative, and that's
mm,
what creates kind of a chaos. Uh, People fall for one narrative. That one narrative creates an illusion. That illusion leads to kind of a discrimination. The discrimination further leads to extremism, and extremism further leads to terrorism. So
mm,
I think this is I mean, a ladder, to reach that level. But
mm,
if I think each and every individual starts looking at multiple narratives and then come to their own conclusion, I
Mm,
think the world will be a much more peaceful place after that. I mean,
mm.
respecting each other's opinions and the stand is also important, but consuming different narratives and then coming to one point is also very important. So yeah, I agree with you actually in this on this point.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you too. Uh,
Yeah.
but I think we need to have in mind technology and information sharing technology. I would say that we've been there in the past when you had mass media in the 1930s. Um, it took a bit of time for people to digest that whatever the radio says or the newspaper says might not be exactly the full
Yes.
picture,
True,
and
true.
that's why you had a bit of, well, a bit a huge tension in the
Yeah, yeah.
1930s and 40s because people were still digesting,
True,
like
true.
this mass amount of information. But you can even go back to the 17th century. Now I'm gonna, sorry, I'm gonna maybe give voice to my inner historian in here. We had a
Yeah,
huge conflict in Europe called the 30 Years' War,
yeah.
which was some kind of very classical, huge confrontation between Europeans. But
Yes.
printing press played a huge role in there. People discovered that you could have pamphlets printed, and you could see, like, they were mostly drawings, but there were drawings with propaganda, and they were basically depicting soldiers of your enemy eating babies. And even though people could not read, those pamphlets were around. They were saying, like, see, Spaniards are eating babies, or the Germans are eating babies, and people were freaking
Yeah.
out. Um, and it took a bit of time for people to understand that whatever appears on a pamphlet, it's not necessarily true. Um,
Yes, yes.
but yeah, sorry. Maybe I were changing the topic in here.
No, no, yeah, I think you're right. Just to kind of add on to it, I always say to the people when I am interacting on kind of diplomacy or foreign policy topics. So it's not only important what you are saying, it's also important to understand your opposing party. Because
Mm,
without understanding the root cause of your opposing nation, you cannot really cooperate and create diplomatic relation with them.
mm, mm,
For example, I would like to give is if we take International Space Station, that's an excellent example.
mm,
Unfortunately, it's not anymore that level of cooperation, but at least for more than 2 decades or more possibly, uh,
mm,
this cooperation, there were several nations involved, but primary it was like United States and Russia. So two
mm,
states with no similar interest cooperated on a scientific level. I
mm.
think that is a one of the benchmark example of diplomacy in the space industry.
True.
And for this, you need to actually understand what the opposing party or or the nation just on the opposite side need to say. You need to understand their needs and demands also. That's when
Mm,
you can also cooperate. It's not so the point I'm trying to say here is like it's not about who is right or wrong. It's about
mm.
how you can stabilize the situation without creating ruckus.
Yeah, actually, I'm quite glad that you're reaching the topic of international space stations because, like, the International Space Station, as you said, it was, I think, something great, but it might disappear in the future. As we know, now we've got two space stations: the International Space Station and then the Chinese Space Station, because the United States of America decided that it was too risky to have China inside the International Space Station because they did not want to allow China to have access to certain technologies, right?
Yes.
But now the Space Station is going to be decommissioned, and we're going to have Project Artemis, which is basically a space station orbiting the moon. That's going to be made
Yes.
by the United States and its allies. We're going to have a Chinese space station orbiting Earth, but also another one orbiting the moon. There are plans for that. But also India announced that they want to have their own space station, and Russia announced the same. And you're going to have all of those private space stations. In fact, I think NASA has three of them. They're having a look at three of them at the moment. So that's going to be very good for the space industry, right? That's going to be a step forward in the cislunar economy. Like first we had nano satellites bringing down the price of rocket launching, and then you've got reusable rockets, and now you're going to have more
Yes.
space stations, which are going to be make possible to have space stations on the moon and maybe to have a permanent presence on the moon, and that's going to boost a huge economy. But as you said, that's not going to be necessarily good for
Yeah.
diplomacy and international relations, because you're going to have more assets that are not shared in space. And that's going to
Yes.
drive us to the militarization of space.
True.
So, there's a series of risks that we should be keeping an eye on. But, well, maybe that's going to be something that we could discuss in the future.
Definitely. I'm hopeful that the students and research scholars will take quite a lot from the last point that we discussed. So thank you very much, Marcel, for coming on the podcast and you giving us your precious time. Excellent insights, and I'm pretty sure there were quite a lot of pointers that we came across. And I would
Mm,
be very happy in the future to create, a series of few episodes, especially on China's role in the Indo-Pacific and
mm.
the international relations and diplomacy that we discuss at the end now. So yeah, thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Omkar, for having me. It has been a pleasure.
Yes. Have a good day. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.